Griffin Solace had spent half his life fighting battles he couldn't win. When his grandfather died and left him a forgotten ranch, he packed up his 11-year-old son and headed west, hoping for a second chance. The ranch hadn't run in decades. The gates were twisted, the barn was gutted, but the livestock pens showed fresh use. The locals said the place had been empty since the fire in 1991. Nobody went out there anymore. Then Griffin started hearing things at night. Footsteps on gravel. Tools moved from where he'd left them. A light in the old silo that had no power. As he worked to fix up the ranch and reconnect with his boy, Griffin discovered his family had secrets. Dark ones. What happened here that his grandfather took to his grave? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drive west had taken 2 days, and with every mile, Griffin felt the city fall away like an old skin he no longer needed. Owen sat in the passenger seat, earbuds in, staring out the window at the changing landscape. They'd left behind the concrete towers and the endless traffic, the courtrooms where Griffin had spent too many hours arguing over custody schedules and alimony payments. They'd left behind the apartment that never quite felt like home, the job at the insurance company that paid the bills but hollowed him out from the inside. Griffin was 50 years old, and he'd spent the last decade feeling like he was drowning in shallow water. The divorce had been ugly. Sarah had wanted different things, bigger things, things that required a man who still believed the world owed him something. Griffin had stopped believing that around the time his hair started going gray. The custody battle had been worse than the divorce itself. Lawyers who billed by the minute, judges who looked at him like he was just another deadbeat dad trying to weasel out of responsibility. He'd fought for Owen because his son was the only thing in his life that still felt real. And now, here they were, driving through high plains country where the sky stretched so wide it made you feel small in the best possible way. The land rolled out in gentle waves, covered in sage and prairie grass that moved like water in the wind. Griffin remembered this landscape from childhood summers, back when the ranch was still alive, when grandfather had been a force of nature with calloused hands and eyes that saw everything. That was before whatever happened in 1991, before grandfather had become quieter, more withdrawn, before Griffin's mother had packed them up and moved them back east, saying only that some places hold too much sadness. The lawyer's letter had come 3 weeks ago. Griffin had been sitting at his kitchen table, sorting through bills he couldn't quite afford to pay, when he'd opened the envelope with the return address from Meridian Flats, Montana. His grandfather was dead. Natural causes, they said. Passed in his sleep at 87. There would be a quiet burial, no service. And the ranch, all 600 acres of it, the buildings, the water rights, everything, it was Griffin's now. He hadn't been back in 30 years, hadn't spoken to his grandfather in 15. The last conversation had been brief, awkward, both of them too proud or too damaged to say what needed saying. Griffin had called to tell him about Owen's birth. His grandfather had congratulated him in that gruff way of his, then said, "A son is a blessing and a burden, Griffin. Don't mess it up the way I did." Griffin had wanted to ask what he meant, but his grandfather had already hung up. Now, as the truck crested a rise and the ranch came into view below, Griffin felt something tighten in his chest. Owen pulled out his earbuds and leaned forward, staring. "That's it?" his son asked. "That's it," Griffin said. It looked worse than he'd imagined. The main house still stood, a 2-story structure of weathered wood and stone that had been built to last. But the barn to the east was half collapsed, its roof caved in on one side like something had taken a bite out of it. The corrals and livestock pens were empty, their gates hanging at odd angles. Outbuildings sagged under the weight of decades of neglect. And everywhere, everything was covered in a layer of dust and abandonment that made the place look like it belonged to ghosts. Griffin pulled the truck up to the main house and killed the engine. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to ring in his ears. No traffic noise, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just the wind and the creak of old wood settling. "It's kind of creepy," Owen said, but there was something in his voice that wasn't entirely negative. At 11, he was at that age where creepy could also mean interesting. "It's home now," Griffin said, then wondered if that was true. Could a place you barely remembered become home again? They climbed out of the truck. Griffin stretched, feeling his lower back pop. 2 days of driving would do that to a 50-year-old body. Owen was already walking toward the house, his sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Griffin grabbed their bags from the truck bed and followed. The front door was unlocked. It opened with a groan that sounded almost human. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. Sheets covered most of the furniture, making everything look like sleeping giants. Griffin found a light switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. "Power's probably been shut off," he said. "I'll call about getting it turned back on tomorrow." They moved through the house room by room. The living room with its massive stone fireplace. The kitchen with its old cast-iron stove and deep porcelain sink. The dining room where Griffin remembered sitting as a child, eating meals prepared by his grandmother before cancer took her. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms. Griffin pointed Owen to the one that had been his when he was a boy. It was smaller than his room in the apartment, but it had a window that looked out over the ranch land stretching toward distant mountains. "This was mine?" Owen asked, running his hand along the dusty windowsill. "Long time ago," Griffin said. He didn't mention that he could barely remember it. Those childhood summers had been bright and golden in his memory, but the details had faded. He remembered his grandfather teaching him to ride, remembered the sound of cattle lowing in the evening, remembered feeling safe in a way he'd never quite felt again. But the specifics were like photographs left too long in the sun. The colors had bled away. Griffin took the master bedroom for himself. It had been his grandfather's room. The bed was made with military precision, the covers pulled tight enough to bounce a quarter on. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Griffin picked it up, blowing dust from the glass. His grandmother smiled up at him, young and beautiful, standing next to his grandfather, who looked impossibly young himself, though his eyes already had that serious quality they'd never lost. Griffin set the photograph back down and moved to the desk in the corner. It was locked, an old roll-top desk made of oak that had probably been in the family for generations. He tried the drawers. All locked. He filed that away as something to deal with later. They spent the rest of the afternoon making the house livable. Griffin got the water running after bleeding air from the pipes. He called the power company from his cell phone and arranged for reconnection the next day. They swept and dusted and pulled sheets off furniture. Griffin found candles and oil lamps in a closet, relics from a time before electricity had reached this far out. They'd need them tonight. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Griffin made dinner on the old gas stove. Canned soup and bread. Nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, Griffin watched his son eat without his phone in his hand. There was no signal out here. No Wi-Fi. Owen had discovered this quickly and adapted with a resignation that was both teenage and touching. "Dad," Owen said between spoonfuls of soup, "why did we really come here?" Griffin set down his spoon. He'd known this question was coming. Owen deserved honesty. "Because I was tired," Griffin said. "Tired of fighting your mother in court. Tired of the city. Tired of feeling like I was failing at everything that mattered. Your grandfather left me this place, and I thought maybe we could have a fresh start. Just you and me." Owen considered this, then nodded. "Are you still tired?" "A little less than I was yesterday," Griffin said, and found that it was true. After dinner, Griffin explored the property while there was still light. He walked past the gutted barn, noting the charred wood that suggested fire damage. The structure was still standing, but barely. Inside, he could see collapsed beams and debris. He made a mental note to keep Owen away from it until he could assess the safety. The livestock pens were more interesting. They were built sturdy, the kind of construction that was meant to last generations. But some of the fencing had been moved recently, he could tell. The wood was weathered, but the arrangement looked fresh, like someone had been using them within the last few weeks. Griffin crouched down, examining the dirt. There were boot prints, not his own. Fresh cigarette butts lay scattered near one fence post. Someone had been here. Recently. Griffin stood, scanning the property with new eyes. The barn, the pens, the outbuildings, all of it supposedly abandoned since 1991. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Someone was using this place, or had been until very recently. He walked toward a structure in the distance. A silo, tall and cylindrical, its metal skin rusted and pitted. As he approached, the last rays of sunlight hit it at an angle, and Griffin could have sworn he saw a light flicker in one of the high windows. He stopped, stared, but the light didn't return. Probably just a reflection, he told himself. Just the sun playing tricks. But his grandfather's words from that last phone call echoed in his mind. Don't mess it up the way I did. What had his grandfather messed up? Griffin returned to the house as darkness fell. Owen was already in bed, reading by candlelight. Griffin checked on him, made sure he was comfortable, then retreated to his own room. He'd brought his grandfather's old hunting rifle from the truck, more out of habit than any real sense of danger, but now he was glad to have it. He propped it in the corner, within easy reach. He lay in his grandfather's bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the old house settling. Wood creaked, wind whistled through gaps in the windows. Outside, somewhere distant, an owl called. Then he heard it. Footsteps on gravel. Griffin sat up, his heart suddenly pounding. He moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain. The yard below was dark, lit only by starlight, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw a shadow move near the barn. Definitely human. Definitely not his imagination. He grabbed the rifle and moved downstairs as quietly as he could. At the front door, he hesitated. What was he going to do? Confront an intruder in the dark? Call the sheriff from a town he hadn't visited in 3 decades? The footsteps stopped. Griffin waited, barely breathing. Then he heard the sound of a truck engine in the distance, fading away. He stood there for a long time, rifle in hand, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. Eventually, he locked the door, something he hadn't thought to do earlier, and went back upstairs. Sleep was a long time coming. When it finally arrived. It was restless and filled with dreams of fire and smoke and his grandfather's face telling him to run, run, run. In the morning, Griffin would find his grandfather's journal. He would start to piece together what happened in 1991. He would learn that some secrets don't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig the hole. And he would understand that he and Owen weren't alone on this ranch. They'd never been alone. Something or someone had been waiting for them to come home. Griffin woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, he was confused. He hadn't set up the coffee maker, didn't even know if there was one, but then he heard Owen moving around downstairs and remembered the old percolator he'd seen in the kitchen cupboard. His son was learning to be self-sufficient out here. That was something. Griffin dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Owen had indeed figured out the percolator and was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, reading a book he'd brought from the city. The morning light streaming through the windows made everything look less threatening than it had the night before. Morning, Griffin said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Morning. Did you hear anything weird last night? Griffin paused mid-pour. Like what? I don't know. Footsteps, maybe. I thought I heard someone walking around outside. So Owen had heard it too. Griffin decided not to lie. Yeah, I heard it. Might have been an animal, or someone from town checking on the place. Owen didn't look convinced, but he went back to his cereal. After breakfast, Griffin made a list of what needed doing. The power company would be out today to restore electricity. He needed to survey the property more thoroughly, assess what could be salvaged and what was beyond repair. And he needed to find a way into that locked desk upstairs. Something told him the answers he was looking for might be in there. He spent the morning exploring the outbuildings. Most were in better shape than the barn, though none had been used in years. He found old tools, rusted but serviceable. Bags of feed that had turned to solid blocks. A tractor that might run again with some work. Everything spoke of a working ranch that had simply stopped one day, like a clock running down. It was when he ventured into the barn that he found the photograph. The structure was more dangerous than he'd thought. The roof had partially collapsed, probably in a fire, and the exposed beams were charred black. Griffin picked his way carefully through the debris, testing each step. Near what had once been a tack room, he found a beam that had fallen at an angle, creating a small space underneath. Something caught his eye. A glint of glass. He pulled out a photograph, protected by a cheap frame that had somehow survived. The glass was cracked, but the picture was clear enough. 4 men stood in front of this very barn, in better days when the paint was fresh and the roof was whole. Griffin recognized his grandfather immediately. Younger, maybe in his 60s, but unmistakably him. 3 other men stood with him, all wearing work clothes, all smiling. Griffin turned the photograph over. On the back, written in his grandfather's neat handwriting, August 15, 1991. Good men, good day. August 1991. 1 month before the journal entry stopped, according to the lawyer's timeline. 1 month before whatever happened that changed everything. But that wasn't what made Griffin's blood run cold. It was the face that had been scratched out. One of the 4 men had been deliberately defaced, the photograph carved with what looked like a knife, the face scraped away until only a white void remained. Someone had wanted to erase this man from the picture. The violence of the act suggested it hadn't been done casually. Griffin slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket and continued his exploration, but his mind was elsewhere. Who were these men? What had happened between August and the fire that supposedly occurred in September? And why had one face been scratched out with such fury? By noon, the power company had come and gone, and the house had electricity again. Griffin made sandwiches for lunch, then told Owen he was driving into town for supplies. He didn't mention that he planned to ask questions about the ranch's history. Meridian Flats was 20 miles down a 2-lane highway that cut straight through prairie land. The town itself was small, maybe 2,000 people at most. Main Street had the usual lineup: a diner, hardware store, a bank, post office, and a handful of other businesses that looked like they'd been there since the 50s. The sheriff's office sat on a corner, a modest brick building with an American flag hanging limp in the still air. Griffin parked in front of the diner. A bell chimed as he pushed through the door. Inside, the lunch crowd had mostly cleared out. A handful of farmers sat at the counter, nursing coffee and talking in low voices. They all looked up when Griffin entered, and the conversation died. He'd expected this. Small towns had long memories, and newcomers, even returning ones, were noticed. Griffin took a booth near the window. A waitress in her 60s, wearing a name tag that said Donna, approached with a pot of coffee. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured, her movements practiced and efficient. "You're staying out at the Solace place." It wasn't a question. Griffin nodded anyway. "Knew your grandfather," Donna said. Good man, quiet, especially toward the end. But good. We were sorry to hear he passed. Thank you, Griffin said. I'm trying to get the place back in order. Been abandoned a long time. Since the fire, Donna said, setting the pot down. Her eyes held something Griffin couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe, or warning. What can you tell me about that? Griffin asked, keeping his voice casual. Donna glanced back at the farmers at the counter. They'd gone quiet, listening. She lowered her voice. Not much to tell. Electrical fire in the old bunkhouse. 3 of your grandfather's hands were killed. Terrible thing. Your grandfather was never the same after. 3 men, Griffin said, pulling out the photograph. Were these them? Donna looked at the picture, and her face went pale. She pushed it back toward him quickly, like it might burn her fingers. I don't know anything about that, she said, her voice suddenly cold. What do you want to eat? Griffin ordered a burger he didn't really want, just to keep her there a moment longer. The ranch hasn't been empty, he said quietly. Someone's been using it. Recently. Donna's hand shook slightly as she wrote down his order. You should be careful asking questions about the past, she said. Some things are better left alone. Why? But she'd already walked away, disappearing into the kitchen without looking back. Griffin ate his burger in silence, feeling the weight of stares from the men at the counter. Nobody spoke to him. When he paid his bill, Donna took his money without meeting his eyes. He tried the hardware store next, hoping for better luck. The owner, an older woman named Martha, according to the sign, was more welcoming. She helped him pick out basic supplies, nails, wire, work gloves, and chatted about the weather and the town with the easy comfort of someone who'd lived there her whole life. Griffin waited until he'd paid before asking about the ranch. Your grandfather kept to himself mostly, Martha said, bagging his purchases. But he was good to this town. When the Callows were running roughshod over people, your grandfather stood up to them. The Callows. Martha's expression darkened. Bad family. Father and 3 sons, running drugs and who knows what else through this county back in the 80s and early 90s. Sheriff couldn't touch them. They had connections. Money. But your grandfather and his men, they put a stop to it. How? Griffin asked, his pulse quickening. Martha lowered her voice. There was a confrontation, out at your ranch. Things got ugly. The Callows left town after that, all but one. Which one? Vincent, youngest boy. He died in that fire, at least that's what folks say. Martha's eyes met his, and Griffin saw something there. Doubt, maybe, or fear. But nobody ever found a body. Griffin drove back to the ranch with more questions than answers. The photograph sat on the seat beside him, those 3 smiling faces and one void where a face should be. He thought about the official story, electrical fire, 3 dead ranch hands, and Martha's hint that Vincent Callow might have been there too. When he arrived home, Owen was sitting on the porch, waiting. His face was troubled. Dad, he said, I found something. Griffin followed his son upstairs to Owen's room. Behind the old wallpaper that was peeling near the bed, Owen had discovered something scratched into the wall. No, not scratched, drawn. Crude stick figures done in what looked like crayon or marker. A child's drawing. It showed buildings on fire. Stick figures running, and in the corner, drawn larger than the others, a figure that seemed to be watching. I think you drew this, Owen said quietly, when you were a kid. Griffin stared at the drawing and felt something shift in his memory. A flash of heat. Smoke, his grandfather's voice shouting. The smell of burning wood and something worse. He'd been there, the night of the fire. He'd been there, and somehow he'd forgotten. Dad, Owen's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? Griffin realized he was shaking. "I need to make a phone call," he said. He called his mother from the kitchen, the old rotary phone still connected and miraculously working. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary when she heard his. "Griffin." "Mom, I need to know what happened here in 1991. Silence on the line. Then, "You shouldn't have gone back there. I need to know." "No, you don't." Her voice was sharp now, frightened. "Your grandfather made sure we all forgot. You should stay forgotten." "Mom, don't call me again about this, Griffin, and get your son out of that place before it's too late." The line went dead. Griffin stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, and realized that whatever happened in 1991 wasn't just his grandfather's secret. It was his too. That night, after Owen had gone to bed, Griffin heard the sound of a truck engine. He moved to the window and saw headlights in the distance near the property line. They sat there for a long time unmoving. Then they flicked off, and the engine went quiet. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. Griffin checked that his rifle was loaded and sat in a chair by the window, watching the darkness. The light in the old silo flickered once, briefly, then went dark. He didn't sleep at all that night. Griffin spent the next 3 days working himself to exhaustion, partly to make progress on the ranch, and partly to keep his mind from circling endlessly around the mystery. He fixed fences, cleared debris, and started cataloging what repairs would cost. Owen helped where he could, and Griffin set up a makeshift homeschool routine in the mornings, math and reading at the kitchen table before they tackled the day's physical work. The boy was adapting better than Griffin had hoped. Away from screens and city distractions, Owen seemed to come alive in a way he hadn't back in the apartment. He explored the property with a child's fearless curiosity, found a creek half a mile from the house, reported seeing deer and rabbits, and once, he claimed, a coyote that watched him from a ridge. But Griffin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed. Tools he'd organized in the barn would be in different positions the next morning. A water trough he'd left empty was full one day, though he hadn't filled it. And twice more he'd seen headlights in the distance at night, always in the same spot, always watching. On the fourth morning, Griffin decided to tackle the locked desk in the master bedroom. He'd found his grandfather's toolbox in one of the sheds, and he selected a screwdriver that might work on the old lock. But as he sat down at the desk, something made him pull out the books from the small shelf above it first. Most were practical volumes: ranch management, cattle breeding, water rights law. But one caught his eye. A leather-bound Bible, old and worn, with his grandmother's name inscribed on the inside cover. Griffin opened it, intending only to look at her handwriting, but the book felt wrong. Too light, too hollow. He examined it more closely and found that the pages had been carved out, creating a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small brass key. Griffin's hands trembled slightly as he tried the key in the desk lock. It turned smoothly, and the roll top slid back with a satisfying click. Inside were the usual things: old bills, receipts, correspondence from decades past. But in the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal. His grandfather's handwriting filled the pages. Griffin carried it to the window where the light was better and began to read. The early entries were mundane: weather observations, notes about cattle prices, reminders to repair this or that. But as Griffin flipped forward to 1991, the tone changed. The entries became shorter, more tense. July 3rd, 1991. The Callow boy is back. Saw his truck on the access road. Tom says he's been nosing around the north pasture. Nothing good will come of this. July 18th, 1991. Found evidence of activity near the old line shack. Someone's been using it. Carlos tracked footprints back toward the Callow property. We're being watched. August 2nd, 1991. Confronted Vincent Callow today. He denies everything, but his eyes told the truth. He's running something through my land, using my ranch as cover. Told him to stay off my property. He laughed. Said I was an old man who should mind his own business. August 15th, 1991. Talked to Tom, Carlos, and Jimmy. They want to go to the sheriff. I told them the sheriff won't do anything. Dawes is in the Callow's pocket. Everyone knows it. But we can't let this continue. Decided we'll handle it ourselves. God forgive us. And then, nothing. The entry stopped. The remaining pages were blank. Griffin sat back, his mind racing. His grandfather and 3 men, Tom Brennan, Carlos Ruiz, and Jimmy Walsh, the names from the newspaper, had confronted the Callows over some kind of criminal activity. And then the fire happened, and 3 good men died. But something didn't add up. If it was just an electrical fire, why did the locals act so strange when he asked about it? Why had his mother been so frightened? Griffin returned to the desk and searched more thoroughly. In a small side drawer, he found a stack of newspaper, clippings, all related to the fire. Tragic fire claims 3 lives at Solace Ranch. Electrical malfunction blamed for fatal blaze. Community mourns loss of local men. But tucked behind the clippings was something else. A letter, never sent, written in his grandfather's hand. It was dated October 1991, a month after the fire. To whoever reads this, I am a coward and a liar. The fire was no accident. Vincent Callow and his brothers came that night with guns and gasoline. They meant to kill us all, to make an example. Tom, Carlos, and Jimmy tried to stand with me. I shot Vincent. I killed him. His brothers set fire to the bunkhouse where my men had taken shelter. I tried to save them, but the fire spread too fast. I got out. They didn't. The sheriff helped me cover it up because the Callows are worse than any lie I could tell. But those 3 men haunt me every day. I see their faces in the flames. I hear them calling for help. I did not save them, and I cannot save myself from the memory. Griffin read the letter 3 times, trying to process what his grandfather had confessed. Self-defense turned tragic. A cover-up to protect against retribution from the surviving Callow brothers. 3 innocent men dead because they'd stood by a friend. The guilt must have been crushing. Griffin tucked the letter back into the desk and went downstairs. He needed to drive into town again, needed to find official records, needed to understand the full truth. He found Owen in the living room reading. "I need to run an errand," Griffin said. "Will you be okay here for a couple hours?" Owen looked up from his book. "Can I come?" Griffin hesitated, then nodded. He didn't want to leave his son alone, not with someone watching the property. In town, Griffin parked in front of the small public library, a single-story building that looked like it had been there since the 50s. Inside, a young librarian directed him to the microfiche machine where old newspapers were archived. Griffin found the coverage of the fire easily enough. The official story matched what Donna had told him. Electrical malfunction, 3 dead, tragic accident. But as he dug deeper, he found something the locals hadn't mentioned. There had been a survivor pulled from the fire, rushed to the hospital with severe burns. Vincent Callow. He'd been listed in critical condition, transferred to a hospital in Billings, and then nothing. No follow-up stories, no obituary. It was as if he'd simply vanished from the record. Griffin's mind raced. If Vincent survived, even briefly, he might have talked, might have told his version of events, and if his brothers believed Griffin's grandfather had murdered him, they'd want revenge. He printed the articles and left the library, his mind churning. Owen waited in the truck, playing with a handheld game Griffin had bought him at the hardware store during their last visit. "Dad," Owen said as Griffin climbed in, "that guy's been watching us." Griffin looked where Owen was pointing. Across the street, leaning against a pickup truck, stood a man in his 40s with a hard face and cold eyes. When he saw Griffin looking, he smiled, not friendly, but challenging, and touched his fingers to his brow in a mock salute. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away. "Do you know him?" Owen asked. "No," Griffin said, but his stomach had gone cold. He'd seen eyes like that before in court, in men who'd given up on playing by society's rules. They drove back to the ranch in silence. Griffin kept checking his rearview mirror, but no one followed them. When they arrived home, everything looked normal. But as Griffin walked toward the barn to check on some tools, he noticed something. The old silo, the one with no power, the one where he'd thought he'd seen a light that first night. There were fresh footprints in the dirt around its base. And carved into the metal door, deep and deliberate, were two initials. C.R. Carlos Ruiz, one of the men who died in the fire. Someone was sending a message. Someone who knew the history. Someone who wanted Griffin to know they were here, they were watching, and they hadn't forgotten what happened in 1991. Griffin looked toward the house, where his son was unpacking groceries, innocent and unaware of the danger building around them. He'd come here for a fresh start, a second chance. Instead, he'd inherited his grandfather's war. And it wasn't over. That evening, after Owen had gone to bed, Griffin sat at the kitchen table with his grandfather's journal and the newspaper clipping spread before him. The initials carved into the silo door bothered him more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. Someone knew exactly which man had died, knew the history, and wanted Griffin to feel haunted by it. He was contemplating calling the sheriff, though he wasn't sure what he'd report, when he heard Owen cry out from upstairs. Griffin took the steps 2 at a time, his heart pounding. Owen was sitting up in bed, breathing hard, eyes wide in the dim light from the hallway. Hey, it's okay," Griffin said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Bad dream?" Owen shook his head. "I heard them again. The voices." "What voices?" "Men talking, outside, by that tall building, the silo thing." Owen's voice was steady, not the uncertain tone of someone half asleep. "They were arguing in Spanish. I don't know Spanish, but it sounded angry." Griffin moved to the window. Owen's room faced the back of the property, and from here he could see the silo silhouetted against the starlit sky. Nothing moved. No lights, no sound carried on the wind. "Stay here," Griffin said. He went downstairs, grabbed his rifle and a flashlight, and stepped out onto the back porch. The night air was cool and still. He moved across the yard, scanning with the flashlight, but saw nothing unusual. At the silo, he found the carved initials still there, but no other evidence of visitors. He was about to turn back when something caught his eye. On the ground, partially hidden by scrub grass, lay a cigarette butt. Fresh, still warm when he touched it. Griffin's jaw clenched. Someone had been here. Recently, possibly while he was inside comforting Owen. The thought of strangers lurking around while his son slept made his blood run hot. He searched the perimeter more thoroughly, found tire tracks again, the same ones he'd seen before, leading toward the back of the property. Tomorrow in daylight, he'd follow them. Tonight he'd keep watch. Back inside, Griffin checked all the doors and windows, made sure everything was locked. He told Owen what he'd found, deciding honesty was better than letting fear breed in ignorance. "Why are they here?" Owen asked. "What do they want?" "I don't know yet," Griffin admitted, "but I'm going to find out, and I'm going to keep you safe. That's a promise." Owen nodded, trusting in a way that made Griffin's chest ache. He couldn't fail his son. Not now, not when they were finally finding their way back to each other. In the morning, Griffin made a decision. He needed more information about Carlos Ruiz and the other men who died. He needed to understand who might be carrying a grudge, who might be watching his property and leaving cryptic messages. After getting Owen settled with his schoolwork, Griffin drove into town again. This time he headed straight for the diner. Donna looked less than pleased to see him return, but she poured him coffee without comment. "I need to talk to someone who knew Carlos Ruiz," Griffin said quietly. "His family. Anyone who can tell me about him." Donna's expression was guarded. "Why?" "Because someone's been coming onto my property at night. Someone who knows about what happened in 1991, and they carved Carlos's initials into my silo door." Donna set down the coffee pot, her face pale. "You need to leave that alone." "I can't. My son lives there now. I need to know what we're dealing with." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Carlos had a sister, Rosa. She runs a small restaurant on the east side of town. If anyone can help you, it's her." Griffin left money on the counter and drove across town. The restaurant was called Rosa's Kitchen, a modest place with a handwritten menu in the window and the smell of something delicious wafting into the street. Inside, a woman in her 60s was wiping down tables. She looked up when the bell over the door chimed. "We don't open until 11, she said, but not unkindly. "Are you Rosa Ruiz?" Her expression shifted, became wary. "Who's asking?" "Griffin Solace. I know who you are." She set down her cleaning cloth. "You're living at the ranch now?" "Yes, ma'am. I need to ask you about your brother, about what happened in 1991. Rosa's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "My brother died because your grandfather got him mixed up in something dangerous. That's all you need to know." "Someone's been coming to my property at night," Griffin said, "leaving messages, watching my son. They carved your brother's initials into the silo. I need to know who might be doing this and why." Rosa sat down heavily in one of the chairs. After a moment, she gestured for Griffin to sit across from her. "Carlos was a good man," she said. "He worked hard, sent money home to our mother in Mexico. Your grandfather gave him a job when no one else would hire an immigrant. Carlos was loyal to him. That's why he died." "Do you know what happened that night?" "Only what the sheriff told us. Fire, accident. But Carlos's wife, she didn't believe it. Said Carlos called her that afternoon, said there was going to be trouble, that Mr. Solace and the other men were planning to confront someone. She begged him not to go, but he said he owed Mr. Solace his loyalty." Griffin felt the weight of that. His grandfather's decisions had cost good people their lives, even if his intentions had been to protect them. "Does Carlos's wife still live in town?" Griffin asked. Rosa shook her head. She moved back to Mexico after. Couldn't stand this place anymore. Took their son with her. "Their son?" "Tomas. He was 17 when his father died. Angry boy. Wanted revenge. The sheriff warned him to let it go, said he'd arrest him if he caused trouble. So Thomas left with his mother. Haven't seen him since." Griffin's stomach tightened. "How old would Thomas be now?" "Mid-40s, I suppose." "Why?" "Because the man who'd been watching them in town, the one who'd given that mocking salute, looked to be in his mid-40s. Griffin didn't say this out loud. "What did Tomas look like?" "Tall, thin, had his father's eyes, dark and intense. Had a scar here." She touched her left cheek. "From a fight when he was young." Griffin thanked her and left, his mind racing. If Thomas had come back, if he blamed Griffin's family for his father's death, that would explain the harassment. But it didn't explain who else might be involved, or why now, after 30 years. He stopped at the sheriff's office, determined to file a report about the trespassing. The sheriff, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes, listened to Griffin's story with barely concealed impatience. "So you've got some footprints and carved initials," Sheriff Dawes said when Griffin finished. "Could be kids, could be nothing." "It's not nothing," Griffin said firmly. "Someone's stalking my property. My son heard voices last night. Out here, sounds carry funny at night. Coyotes can sound almost human sometimes." Dawes leaned back in his chair. "Look, Mr. Solace, I understand you're new to the area. But stirring up the past isn't going to help you settle in. Your grandfather had troubles, and those troubles are buried with him. Best leave them that way. Are you telling me you won't investigate? I'm telling you there's nothing to investigate. You've got no evidence of a crime. Come back if something actually happens. Griffin left the sheriff's office feeling frustrated and increasingly isolated. Nobody in this town wanted to help him uncover the truth. They all seemed to think the past should stay buried. But the past wasn't staying buried. It was walking around his property at night, watching his house, threatening his son. When Griffin returned home, he found Owen standing in the yard, holding something. "Dad," Owen said, his voice shaking, "I found this in my window. It was stuck under the sill." It was a child's drawing, crude and disturbing. It showed a house on fire with stick figures inside. Scrawled across the bottom in red marker were the words, "Your grandfather's sins, your son's future." Griffin pulled Owen close, his mind made up. Tomorrow he'd install security cameras. He'd get a better lock for the doors, and he'd find out who Thomas Aruis was and what he wanted. Because whoever was doing this had just made it personal. They'd threatened his son, and Griffin would die before he let anything happen to Owen. Griffin spent the next morning installing motion sensor lights around the property and setting up a basic security camera system he'd bought at an electronics store in the next town over. Owen helped run wires, treating it like an adventure rather than the necessity it was. Griffin didn't mention the drawing again, didn't want to feed his son's fear, but he'd locked it in the desk drawer as evidence. By afternoon, the system was operational. Griffin showed Owen how to check the camera feeds on the laptop, explained that any movement would trigger recording. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. "Do you think they'll come back?" Owen asked. "I think whoever's doing this wants to scare us off," Griffin said. "But we're not going anywhere. This is our home now." Owen nodded, but Griffin could see the worry in his eyes. He was 11 years old. He should be worrying about school and friends, not about strangers threatening his family. That evening, Griffin made a decision. He needed official documentation, something beyond the newspaper clippings and his grandfather's letter. He needed the actual police report from 1991, and he knew just who to ask. At the hardware store the next day, Griffin found Martha organizing inventory. She greeted him warmly, and when the store was empty, he approached her directly. "Martha, I need your help. Who in the sheriff's department might be willing to talk to me honestly about what happened in 1991? Martha considered this carefully. "Sheriff Dawes won't help you. He was deputy back then, and he's got his own reasons for keeping things quiet. But there's a young deputy, Cole Martinez. He's Carlos Ruiz's nephew. His family never believed the official story. Would he talk to me?" "Might. He comes in here for coffee sometimes around 3. I could mention you'd like to speak with him." Griffin thanked her and spent the afternoon working on the ranch, his mind half on the repair work and half on what he'd say to Cole Martinez. At 3 o'clock, he returned to the hardware store. Cole Martinez was younger than Griffin expected, maybe 30, with an earnest face and his uncle's dark eyes. Martha introduced them, then tactfully left them alone in the corner of the store. "Mrs. Brennan says you're asking about the fire," Cole said without preamble. "Brennan?" "Martha. She was married to Tom Brennan, one of the men who died. She went back to her maiden name after." Griffin felt a weight settle in his chest. Martha had lost her husband that night and had never said a word. "I need to know the truth," Griffin said. "Someone's been coming to my property, threatening my son. They know about what happened, and they're using it against me." Cole studied him carefully. "What makes you think the official story isn't the truth?" "Because I found my grandfather's letter. Because the locals act terrified when I ask questions. Because someone carved my uncle's initials into my silo door." Griffin kept his voice low, urgent. "I have a son to protect. I need to know what I'm dealing with." Cole glanced around the store, then made a decision. Meet me at the old grain elevator on Route 47 at 9 tonight. Come alone, and don't tell anyone, especially not Sheriff Dawes." Griffin agreed, and Cole left without another word. The rest of the day dragged. Griffin made dinner, played cards with Owen, tried to act normal even though his mind was racing. At 8:30, he told Owen he needed to check on some equipment in the north pasture and would be back in an hour. The grain elevator stood abandoned off Route 47, a relic from when the railroad still stopped in Meridian Flats. Cole's truck was already there, headlights off. Griffin parked beside it and climbed into the passenger seat. "This is a copy of the original fire investigation report," Cole said, handing Griffin a manila folder. "I could lose my job for sharing this, but my Tio Carlos deserves the truth to be known, even if it's 30 years late." Griffin opened the folder, using the overhead light in the truck. The report was detailed, technical, and full of red flags. The fire had started simultaneously in 3 locations, impossible for an electrical malfunction. Accelerant traces had been found, but the investigator had attributed them to stored gasoline and kerosene, common on ranch properties. The bunkhouse had burned completely. The 3 victims identified primarily through dental records because the bodies were too severely damaged. But it was the witness statements that made Griffin's blood run cold. His grandfather had claimed he wasn't on the property the night of the fire, a lie. A neighbor had reported seeing multiple vehicles on the access road around the time of the fire, but this had been dismissed as unreliable testimony. And most damning, one survivor had been pulled from the fire, severely burned but alive. "Vincent Callow," Griffin said. Cole nodded. He was transferred to the burn unit in Billings. Critical condition. The report says he died 3 days later, but here's the thing. There's no death certificate on file, no burial record, no follow-up investigation. What does that mean? It means either Vincent Callow survived and disappeared, or someone made him disappear. Cole's expression was grim. "My family always believed your grandfather acted in self-defense. The Callows were running drugs through this area, using ranch lands as cover. When your grandfather and his men confronted them, things went bad." "My grandfather shot Vincent," Griffin said. "He admitted it in his letter. Self-defense. Then Vincent's brothers set fire to the bunkhouse with your grandfather's men inside. Revenge. But here's what doesn't make sense. If Vincent died, why is there no body? Why no death certificate?" Griffin felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "Because he didn't die. He survived and went into hiding." "Or witness protection," Cole suggested. The Callows were big enough that the feds might have been interested. If Vincent cooperated, testified against his brothers, he could have gotten a new identity. But his brothers wouldn't know that. They'd think my grandfather killed him. Exactly. And the surviving Callows would want revenge. Cole handed Griffin another document. "This is a property deed transfer from 1992. The Callow family ranch, sold to a development company. The Callow brothers, Dean and Marcus, left town right after. Dean moved to Wyoming. Marcus died in a bar fight in Cheyenne 5 years ago. What about Dean? That's the interesting part. Dean Callow came back to Montana 3 years ago, lives in Billings now, runs a construction company." Cole met Griffin's eyes. "And 6 months ago, he started making inquiries about water rights in this county, specifically about properties with access to the aquifer. Like my grandfather's ranch. Like your grandfather's ranch. The property's been getting more valuable. Development companies want the water. If someone could force you to sell, or if something happened to you and your son, the property would go to my ex-wife or to the state." Griffin felt sick. "And someone could buy it at auction." Cole nodded. "Your grandfather's death was ruled natural causes, but he went downhill fast in his last year. And now you're here, and strange things are happening." Griffin thought about the man he'd seen in town, the one who'd given that mocking salute. Did Dean Callow have a scar on his left cheek? No, but he has a son who does. Thomas. Dean brought him back from Mexico last year. The kid's been in trouble. Assault charges, harassment, nothing that stuck. Thomas. Rosa's nephew, Carlos Ruiz's son. Griffin's mind reeled. Was Thomas working for Dean Callow, the man whose brother had set the fire that killed his father, or was he working his own angle, seeking revenge for a father lost 30 years ago? I need to file a formal complaint, Griffin said. Someone left a threatening note for my son. Cole's expression was pained. Sheriff Dawes won't act on it. He's known Dean Callow for years. There are rumors. He hesitated, then continued. That Dawes might be on his payroll. That's why I'm showing you this off the record. What am I supposed to do? Wait until they hurt my son? Document everything. Keep your cameras running. If you get solid evidence of trespassing or threats, bring it directly to me. I'll bypass Dawes and take it to the state police. Cole gripped Griffin's shoulder. And Griffin, be careful. If Dean Callow is involved, this isn't just about old revenge. It's about money, and people kill for a lot less than water rights are worth. Griffin drove home in the dark, the folder hidden under his seat, his mind churning. Owen was safe, asleep in his bed, but for how long? How long before someone decided harassment wasn't enough? How long before the threats became action? Back at the ranch, Griffin checked the camera feeds. Nothing unusual. He locked all the doors and windows, then sat in the living room with his rifle across his lap, watching the monitors until dawn. He'd come here for a fresh start. Instead, he'd walked into a conspiracy that stretched back decades, involving murder, cover-ups, and greed. His grandfather had killed a man and watched 3 innocents die because of it. Now, 30 years later, Griffin was paying for those sins. But he wouldn't run. He wouldn't let them drive him off his own land, and he sure as hell wouldn't let them touch his son. Whatever was coming, Griffin would be ready. The next morning, Griffin woke from an uneasy doze to find Owen already up, making breakfast. His son had learned the rhythms of ranch life quickly, early to bed, early to rise. Griffin joined him in the kitchen, grateful for the normalcy of scrambled eggs and toast. "Dad," Owen said as they ate, "can we go look for that lockbox today?" Griffin had almost forgotten. His grandfather's letter had mentioned the box under the old oak, but the property had dozens of oak trees scattered across its 600 acres. "Why not?" Griffin said. The physical work would do him good, give him time to think, and searching for the lockbox was safer than sitting around waiting for the next threat. They spent the morning methodically searching near the larger oaks, using a metal detector Griffin had borrowed from Martha. Owen treated it like treasure hunting, running the detector in sweeping arcs while Griffin dug test holes. Most finds were junk, old horseshoes, rusted nails, buried cans. But around noon, near an ancient oak tree close to the burned-out bunkhouse foundation, the detector gave a strong signal. Griffin dug carefully, Owen kneeling beside him in the dirt. 3 feet down, his shovel hit something solid. Together they cleared away the soil to reveal a metal lockbox, rusted but intact. It was heavy, securely locked. Griffin pulled out the brass key from his pocket, the one he'd found in the hollowed-out Bible. His hand shook slightly as he inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the lid opened with a groan of old metal. Inside, wrapped in plastic bags to protect them from moisture, were several items. Cash, a substantial amount in old bills. The original deed to the ranch, signed by Griffin's great-grandfather. And a letter, addressed in his grandfather's familiar handwriting. "To Griffin, when you're ready." Griffin sat back in the dirt, holding the letter. Owen watched him quietly, understanding somehow that this was important. "Give me a minute," Griffin said. He opened the envelope and began to read. "Griffin, If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've come back to the ranch. Maybe you came because you had nowhere else to go. Maybe you came looking for answers. Either way, you deserve the truth. I killed a man. His name was Vincent Callow, and he was running drugs through our county, using ranch lands as cover, threatening families who wouldn't cooperate. I was younger then, still thought I could fix problems with a rifle and determination. Tom Brennan, Carlos Ruiz, and Jimmy Walsh. Good men, my friends. They wanted to go to the law. I convinced them we could handle it ourselves. That was my first mistake. We confronted Vincent and his brothers at the ranch. It turned into a standoff in the bunkhouse. Vincent pulled a gun. I shot him. I thought I killed him. His brothers, Dean and Marcus, went crazy with rage. They doused the bunkhouse in gasoline and set it on fire with Tom, Carlos, and Jimmy inside. I tried to get them out. God knows I tried. But the fire was too fast, too hot. I got out. They didn't. The sheriff helped me cover it up. Dawes was deputy then, ambitious and already on the Callow payroll. He saw an opportunity. If we blamed it on an electrical fire, the Callows would leave town, his corruption would stay buried, and I wouldn't go to prison for murder, even if it was self-defense. I agreed because I was a coward and because I had a grandson I wanted to protect. You were there that night, Griffin. You were 10 years old, staying with me for the summer. You saw things no child should see. I sent you home the next day and made sure you forgot. Your mother helped me with that. We never spoke of it again. But I never forgot. Every night for 30 years, I've seen those men burning. I've heard them screaming. I've lived with the knowledge that my choices killed 3 innocent men who trusted me. Vincent didn't die, Griffin. He survived the fire. The feds got to him first, gave him a new identity in exchange for testimony against the Mexican cartels his brothers were working with. I know this because Dawes told me years later, drunk and bragging about how he'd helped arrange it. Vincent Callow is alive, somewhere, living under another name, while 3 good men are dead because of me. Dean Callow left Montana, but he never forgot, never forgave. If he comes back, if he knows you're here, he'll want revenge. The land isn't worth your life or Owen's. If the Callows come for you, walk away. Let them have it. Don't make my mistakes. But if you choose to stay, know this. The ranch has defensive positions I marked on maps in my study. I've left weapons hidden in the storm cellar. And I've contacted a lawyer in Billings who has evidence of Dawes' corruption to be released upon my death. It won't bring back the men I lost, but it might give you leverage if you need it. I'm sorry, Griffin. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the weight I'm leaving on your shoulders. Sorry I wasn't the grandfather you deserved. The land is yours. What you do with it is your choice. But know that I loved you, even when I couldn't say it. Your grandfather, William Solace. Griffin read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it back in the lockbox. Owen waited patiently, not asking questions, just being present. Griffin was grateful for that. His grandfather hadn't been a villain or a hero. He'd been a man who made hard choices that went wrong, who lived with guilt that poisoned his last years. And now Griffin had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Was it bad? Owen asked quietly. It was honest, Griffin said. Sometimes that's the same thing. They returned to the house with the lockbox. Griffin spent the afternoon going through his grandfather's study, looking for the maps mentioned in the letter. He found them rolled up behind a filing cabinet, detailed topographic maps of the property with defensive positions marked in red. His grandfather had been military, Griffin remembered. Special forces in Vietnam. He'd known how to prepare for a fight. Griffin also found the storm cellar key and went to investigate. The cellar was accessed through a door in the barn, hidden under debris. Inside, preserved in the cool darkness, were weapons. Rifles, handguns, ammunition, all carefully maintained and stored. His grandfather had been preparing for the possibility that the Callows would return. That evening, Griffin called the lawyer mentioned in the letter. The man confirmed everything. He had documents proving Dawes had accepted bribes from the Callows, had helped cover up their drug operations, and had falsified the fire investigation. The documents would be released to state authorities in 1 week unless Griffin contacted him to delay. "Your grandfather wanted insurance," the lawyer said. "Wanted to make sure if something happened to him, the truth would come out." "Do you think his death was natural?" Griffin asked. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "I think your grandfather was old and tired, but I also think the timing is convenient. He died 3 months after Dean Callow moved back to Montana. Make of that what you will." Griffin hung up, feeling the weight of knowledge settle on him. His grandfather might have been murdered. Dean Callow was back and possibly working with a corrupt sheriff to acquire the property, and Tomas Ruiz, son of one of the dead men, was involved somehow, either seeking his own revenge or working for Callow. That night, Griffin watched the security cameras with new awareness. Around midnight, headlights appeared on the access road. Not one vehicle, 3. They parked at the property line, engines running, lights on. Griffin counted 5 men in total. They stayed there for an hour, just watching the house, before driving away. The message was clear. "We're here. We're many. We can come any time we want." Griffin checked on Owen, still asleep, safe, then returned to the window. He thought about his grandfather's advice. The land isn't worth your life or Owen's. If the Callows come for you, walk away. But Griffin had already run once. Run from his marriage, from his failures, from the life he'd built that fell apart. He'd come here hoping for a second chance, a place where he could be the father Owen needed. If he ran now, what would that teach his son? That when things get hard, you abandon what matters. That fear makes the decisions? No. Griffin wouldn't run, but he wouldn't be stupid either. Tomorrow he'd call Cole Martinez. They'd review the lawyer's evidence. They'd build a case against Dawes that couldn't be ignored. And if Dean Callow and his men came onto this property with violence in mind, Griffin would be ready. Not eager, not reckless, but ready. His grandfather had said, "Don't make my mistakes." But maybe the mistake wasn't the fighting. Maybe the mistake was carrying the guilt alone for 30 years, letting it poison everything, never seeking justice for the men who died. Griffin would honor those men. He'd expose the truth, and he'd protect his son. Whatever came next, he'd face it with his eyes open and his conscience clear. That was all any man could do. Griffin woke at dawn to the sound of vehicles, not on the access road this time, but right outside the house. He grabbed his rifle and looked out the window to see Cole Martinez's patrol car, along with 2 other sheriff's department vehicles. He met Cole at the door. The deputy's face was grim. "Got your message about the vehicles last night," Cole said. "Brought back up to check the property line for evidence of trespassing." They spent the morning documenting tire tracks, finding cigarette butts and boot prints, photographing everything. The other 2 deputies, young men Cole said he trusted, were thorough and professional. It wasn't much, but it was documentation, evidence. When they finished, Cole pulled Griffin aside. "This is good. We can show a pattern of harassment. But Griffin, I need to tell you something. Sheriff Dawes called me into his office yesterday. Asked me pointed questions about why I was spending time with you. He's suspicious." "What did you tell him?" "That you're new to the area and needed help understanding local law. But he's watching me now." Cole's expression was troubled. "We need to move carefully." After the deputies left, Griffin decided to check his own security cameras. He'd set them up 3 days ago, and they should have captured whoever had been harassing them. He pulled up the footage on his laptop, Owen watching over his shoulder. The first 2 nights showed nothing unusual. Small animals, shadows, but no humans. Then, on the third night, around 2 in the morning, the barn camera caught movement. A figure approached the barn, clearly human, clearly deliberate. But the image was distorted, pixelated, like someone was jamming the signal. Griffin switched to the other cameras. Same thing. All of them showed corrupted footage at the exact same time. This wasn't equipment failure. This was intentional interference. "Someone's using a jammer," Griffin said. "Something to disrupt the cameras." "Can they do that?" Owen asked. "With the right equipment, yeah." Griffin's mind raced. This wasn't just harassment by angry locals. This was sophisticated, professional. He decided to check the barn more carefully, looking for any evidence the intruder might have left. Owen came with him, not wanting to be left alone in the house. In the barn, Griffin searched systematically. Nothing obvious had been moved or damaged, but as he examined one of his damaged cameras, he noticed something. A small device mounted on the rafters above it, camouflaged but visible once you knew to look for it. Griffin climbed up and retrieved it. The device was small, high-tech, with a blinking LED light. Not a jammer, a recorder. Someone had been listening to them, recording their conversations. Cole arrived within 20 minutes of Griffin's call. He examined the device carefully, his face growing darker with each passing moment. "This is law enforcement grade," Cole said finally. "This isn't something you buy online. This is equipment that requires authorization to purchase." "Meaning?" Griffin asked, though he already knew. "Meaning someone in law enforcement put this here." Cole met Griffin's eyes. "This was here before you arrived. Look at the dust pattern. It's been here for weeks, maybe months." Griffin felt cold spread through his chest. Someone was recording my grandfather. And now they're recording you. Cole examined the device more closely. "It's got a transmitter. The recordings are being sent to a receiver somewhere. If we can find the receiver..." They searched the property systematically. It took 2 hours, but they finally found it. A weather-proof box hidden in a hollow tree near the property line, containing a receiver and storage device. Cole opened it carefully, photographing everything before touching it. The device had been recording for months. The storage was nearly full. Cole downloaded the data to a drive, his hands steady despite the implications. Back at the house, they listened to the recordings. Most were mundane. Griffin talking to Owen, phone calls, daily life. But as they scrolled back to recordings from before Griffin's arrival, they found something else. His grandfather's voice, thin and weak, talking to himself, or perhaps to no one. "They're poisoning me. I know it. I can feel it. But I can't prove it. Can't fight it. I'm too old, too tired." Griffin's hands clenched into fists. Cole kept listening. Another recording. His grandfather on the phone. "I know what you're doing, Dawes. I know you want the land. But I won't sell. Not to you. Not to Callow. When I'm gone, it goes to my grandson." Dawes's voice, tinny through the phone speaker. "You're a stubborn old fool, William, but everyone dies eventually. Natural causes. Sad, but inevitable." The implied threat was clear. They kept listening. More recordings, conversations that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Dawes wasn't just corrupt. He was actively working with Dean Callow to acquire properties with water rights. They'd targeted several ranches, forcing sales through harassment, legal pressure, and in his grandfather's case, murder disguised as natural decline. But it was the most recent recording that made Griffin's blood run cold. 2 days ago, while he'd been in town, someone had entered his house. The recorder had picked up voices, Dawes and another man, discussing the property. "The kid's in the way," the other voice said. Not Dean Callow, someone else, someone whose voice was familiar. "Kids have accidents," Dawes replied. "Falls from haylofts, drowning in creeks. Tragic but common on ranches." Griffin stopped the playback, feeling sick. They were planning to hurt Owen, to kill him and make it look like an accident. Cole's face was white with fury. That's conspiracy to commit murder. That's evidence that'll stand up in court. We have him. Who's the other voice? Griffin asked. Cole rewound and played it again. Then his expression changed. That's Thomas Ruiz, Carlos's son. Why would Carlos Ruiz's son be working with the people who killed his father? I don't know, but we need to figure it out fast because based on that conversation, they're planning to act soon. Griffin thought about Thomas, orphaned at 17, angry, raised by a grieving mother in a foreign country. What had Dean Callow offered him? Money? Revenge on the family that got his father killed? Or was there something else, something they were missing? Cole made a decision. I'm taking this directly to the state police. Dawes can't bury this. But Griffin, you and Owen need to leave. Now. Go to a hotel in Billings, somewhere public and safe, while I get this handled. Griffin wanted to argue, but Cole was right. With evidence of a murder conspiracy against his son, staying here was reckless. He called Owen down and explained quickly. We're taking a trip. Pack a bag, just for a few days. But before they could finish packing, Griffin heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Multiple engines. He looked out the window and saw them, 5 trucks forming a semicircle around the house, blocking the driveway. Men climbed out, at least 8 of them, some carrying rifles. Dean Callow stood in front, a man in his late 60s with a weathered face and cold eyes. Beside him was a younger man with a scar on his left cheek, Thomas Ruiz. Cole saw them too and immediately called for backup on his radio. But they were 20 miles from town. Backup would take time. Griffin grabbed his rifle. Owen, storm cellar. Now. Dad, now. Owen ran. Griffin turned to Cole. I'm not letting them near my son. Neither am I, Cole said, drawing his service weapon. They stepped out onto the porch together. Dean Callow smiled. Not friendly, but satisfied, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. Griffin Solace, he called out. We need to have a conversation about your grandfather's debt and about this property. You've been causing problems, asking questions, stirring up trouble. That ends today. Sheriff's Department, Cole called out. You're all trespassing. Leave the property immediately. Dawes' truck pulled up then, last in the line. The sheriff climbed out, his expression amused. Deputy Martinez, Dawes said, I didn't authorize you to be here. I don't need authorization to respond to harassment and threats, Cole replied. This is a civil matter, property dispute. Nothing criminal. Dawes walked forward casually. Mr. Solace, these men have made you a generous offer for this land. I suggest you take it. Griffin kept his rifle trained on Dean Callow. I'm not selling, and you're all under arrest. Dawes laughed. On what charge? Conspiracy to murder, Cole said. We have recordings, Dawes. We have everything. Your threats against William Solace. Your plans to kill Griffin and his son. All of it. For the first time, Dawes' confidence faltered. His eyes darted to Dean Callow, who'd gone very still. You're bluffing, Dawes said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The state police are on their way, Cole said. They'll be here in 15 minutes. You can leave now, or you can stay and face arrest. Your choice. The standoff held for a long moment. Griffin could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears. 8 armed men against 2. If this turned violent, people would die. Then Tomas Ruiz spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. You killed my father. Griffin met his eyes. No, your father died trying to protect mine from the Callows. The same Callows you're working with now. Thomas's face twisted with confusion and rage. You're lying. Dean told me. Dean Callow's brothers set the fire that killed your father, Griffin said. My grandfather tried to save him. That's the truth. Your father died a hero, and you're dishonoring his memory by working with the people who murdered him." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Thomas turned to Dean Callow, his scarred face full of doubt. "Is that true?" Dean's expression hardened. "The old man killed Vincent. That's what matters." "My father," Thomas said slowly. "Your brothers killed my father." "Collateral damage. Your father was in the way." Thomas raised his rifle, but not toward Griffin, toward Dean Callow. "You told me Solace killed everyone. You told me—" The situation erupted. Dean's men moved, weapons coming up. Cole shouted warnings, and Griffin did the only thing he could. He dove back into the house and slammed the door, yelling for Owen to stay down. Gunfire erupted outside. Griffin couldn't tell who was shooting at whom, but he knew one thing. This had become exactly what his grandfather had feared. Violence begetting violence, old sins demanding new blood. He had to protect his son. Nothing else mattered. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Griffin crouched by the window, rifle ready, trying to see what was happening. Through the glass, he saw Cole taking cover behind his patrol car, weapon drawn. Thomas Ruiz had separated from Dean Callow's men and was shouting something Griffin couldn't make out. Two of Dean's men lay on the ground, wounded or dead. Griffin couldn't tell. The others had taken defensive positions behind their trucks. Griffin's phone buzzed. A text from Cole. "Keep Owen safe. Back up 10 minutes out. Don't engage." Easy for him to say. They were trapped in the house with armed men outside who wanted them dead. Griffin moved quickly to the storm cellar entrance in the kitchen floor. He pulled it open and climbed down. Owen was huddled in the corner, pale but composed. "Are they gone?" Owen asked. "Not yet, but they will be." Griffin moved to the weapons cache his grandfather had stored. He selected a second rifle and ammunition, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. But as he organized the supplies, he noticed something else. A VHS tape, carefully labeled in his grandfather's handwriting. Final message. "Owen, stay here no matter what. If anyone comes down those stairs who isn't me or Deputy Martinez, you hide behind those supply crates. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Griffin climbed back up, taking the VHS tape with him. The house had an old television with a built-in VCR in the living room, one of the few antiques his grandfather had maintained. Griffin popped in the tape and pressed play. His grandfather's face appeared on the screen, gaunt and tired. The date stamp in the corner showed this had been recorded 3 weeks before he died. "Griffin," his grandfather's voice came through thin but clear, "if you're watching this, I'm gone and they've come for you. I'm sorry I didn't do more to protect you. Sorry I left you this burden, but I need you to understand what you're facing. Dean Callow isn't just after revenge, he's after the land. This property sits on one of the largest aquifer access points in the county. With climate change, water rights are becoming more valuable than gold. Dean's been buying up properties for years, forcing people out, working with doors to manipulate the system. He tried to buy me out 5 times. When I refused, he started poisoning me. Slow, careful, made it look like natural decline. I've documented everything. The evidence is with lawyer Samuel Brennan in Billings, Tom's brother. He'll release it to authorities 1 week after my death unless someone stops him. Dean knows this. That's why he'll move fast once you arrive. He'll try to scare you off or, if that doesn't work, make you disappear before that evidence goes public. But here's what Dean doesn't know. This property is defensible. I was Special Forces, son. I spent 30 years learning how to protect ground against superior forces. Look at the maps in my study. The high ground near the old silo gives you a tactical advantage. The barn and house create natural choke points. And I've left you supplies in the storm cellar, not just weapons, but smoke grenades, night vision equipment, everything you might need. I'm not saying you should fight. I'm saying if you choose to stand your ground, you can. Dean Callow is a bully and a coward. He's dangerous, but he's not invincible. His men are hired muscle, not soldiers. If you're smart and careful, you can outlast them until help arrives. The most important thing, protect Owen. He's innocent in all this. Get him to safety first. The land isn't worth his life. But if he's safe and you choose to defend what's yours, know that I'm proud of you. Know that you're doing what I should have done 30 years ago, standing up to evil instead of letting it fester in the dark. One last thing. Don't trust Tomas Ruiz. Carlos's son blames our family for his father's death. Dean's been manipulating him, promising him revenge and money. But Thomas doesn't know the full truth. If you can reach him, if you can show him what really happened, he might turn. His father was a good man. Maybe some of that goodness survived. I love you, Griffin. I know I never said it enough, but I love you and I believe in you. You're twice the man I ever was. Don't let my mistakes define your life. Now go. Fight or run, but choose, and live with your choice. That's all any of us can do. The screen went to static. Griffin stood there, feeling the weight of his grandfather's words settle on him. The old man had been preparing for this scenario, had left him everything he needed, but he'd also given him permission to walk away. Griffin thought about Owen in the cellar, thought about the life they could build somewhere else, thought about running, starting over again, always looking over his shoulder. No, he was done running. He moved to his grandfather's study and pulled out the tactical maps. His grandfather had marked defensive positions with a soldier's precision. The silo commanded a view of all approach routes. The house and barn created a natural defensive perimeter, and the terrain, rolling hills with sparse cover, favored defenders who knew it well. Griffin heard vehicles moving outside. He looked out the window and saw Dean's men repositioning, spreading out. They weren't leaving. They were preparing for a siege. His phone rang. Cole. State police are 5 minutes out, Cole said quickly. But Dawes is claiming this is a property dispute that got out of hand. He's trying to position himself as a peacekeeper. Griffin, he's going to try to force entry to secure the situation. Don't let him in. Once those state troopers arrive, this becomes official. Dawes can't bury it then. What about you? I'm pinned behind my car. Took a round through the window, but I'm okay. Tomas is with me. He's turned, Griffin. Once he understood the truth, he switched sides. But we're outnumbered. Can you make it to the house? Too much open ground. We stay here. We hold position. We wait for backup. Griffin ended the call and moved through the house, checking windows, making sure all entrances were secured. He'd never been a soldier, never been in combat. But his grandfather had left him instructions, and Griffin had spent his whole life learning to think strategically, first in business, then in custody court battles. This was just another kind of chess, except the stakes were infinitely higher. A voice called out from the yard. Dean Callow. Solace, this can end peacefully. Sign the deed over, take your boy, and leave. You've got my word, nobody gets hurt. Griffin moved to the front window, staying back from the glass. Your word isn't worth much, Callow. We both know how this ends if I step outside. The state police are coming. You think they'll side with you, a newcomer making wild accusations, or with Sheriff Dawes, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement. This is a property dispute. You're the one who fired first. I haven't fired at all, Griffin called back. And we've got recordings of you and Dawes planning to murder my son. That's going to be hard to explain away. The silence that followed told Griffin he'd scored a point. Dean hadn't known about the recordings, hadn't known his surveillance equipment had been found. Where are those recordings? Dean's voice had lost its confident edge. Safe, multiple copies, already sent to the state police. Griffin was bluffing about the last part, but Dean didn't need to know that. Then we've got nothing to lose, Dean said, and Griffin heard the shift in his tone, A man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind. Griffin moved quickly back to the storm cellar. Owen, change of plans. We're going to the silo. Grab the backpack I packed. The silo. Best defensive position on the property. Grandpa's notes say so. We can see everything from up there, and there's only one way in. Come on. They moved fast, using the back door, while Dean's men were focused on the front. The silo was 100 yards away, across open ground. Griffin scanned the area. 2 of Dean's men were visible, but they were watching the house, not the back approach. Griffin and Owen ran, keeping low. They made it to the silo without being spotted. The door was rusted, but Griffin forced it open. Inside, the structure was empty except for old grain dust and a metal ladder leading up 5 stories to the top. Climb, Griffin ordered. Fast as you can. They climbed. Griffin's arms burned from the effort, but adrenaline pushed him on. At the top, they emerged onto a circular platform with windows offering views in all directions. His grandfather had been right. This was perfect. You could see everything from up here. Griffin used his phone to video the scene below. Dean's men moving into position. Doors coordinating with them, his badge clearly visible. This was evidence that couldn't be denied. He saw Cole and Thomas still pinned behind the patrol car. Saw one of Dean's men circling around, trying to flank them. Griffin raised his rifle, sighted carefully, and fired a shot into the ground 5 feet from the flanking man. The man dove for cover. His advance stopped. "What are you doing?" Owen asked, scared but trusting. "Making sure the good guys survive until backup arrives," Griffin said. He fired another warning shot, this time near a second man who was advancing on the house. "Your grandpa was smart. From up here, we control the battlefield." But even as he said it, Griffin saw more vehicles arriving. Not state police. More of Dean's men. How many people did he have on his payroll? Then Griffin saw something that changed everything. A truck was backing up to the barn. Men were unloading something. Containers of liquid. Gasoline. They were going to burn it all. The barn, the house, everything. Just like they'd burned the bunkhouse in 1991. History was repeating itself, and Griffin had to stop it. He pulled out his phone and called Cole. "They're going to burn the barn. That's our evidence, our safety. We have to stop them." "Griffin, wait for backup." But Griffin wasn't waiting anymore. He'd waited his whole life, run from conflict, avoided confrontation. His grandfather had died alone, poisoned slowly, too proud or too guilty to ask for help. Griffin wouldn't make that mistake. "Owen," he said carefully, "I need you to stay here. Don't come down no matter what. When the state police arrive, you wave your arms and shout. Let them know you're here. Understand?" "Dad, don't. I love you," Griffin said. "More than anything in this world. You're the reason I keep fighting. Remember that." Then he climbed down the ladder, leaving his son safe at the top while he went to face the men who wanted to destroy everything his grandfather had built and everything Griffin hoped to become. Griffin emerged from the silo with his rifle and his grandfather's night vision goggles. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful and terrible, like the fire that had consumed 3 good men 30 years ago. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. He moved quickly toward the barn, using the terrain for cover. Dean's men were focused on their task, unloading gasoline containers and preparing to torch the building. Griffin counted 4 men near the barn. Bad odds, but manageable if he was smart. He circled around, approaching from the blind side. Through a gap in the barn wall, he could see them clearly now. They were amateurs, hired muscle who thought their numbers made them invincible. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory from that video. Dean's men are hired muscle, not soldiers. Griffin fired a shot into the dirt at their feet. All 4 men dove for cover, weapons coming up. But Griffin was already moving, using their confusion to close the distance. He reached the barn door and kicked it open, diving inside just as return fire splintered wood where he'd been standing. Inside the barn, Griffin found cover behind a support beam. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands were steady. This was fear, yes, but also something else. Certainty. He was done being pushed around. Done letting other people's greed and violence dictate his life. "Solace," one of the men called out. "You're making this worse on yourself. Come out and nobody gets hurt." "That's what you told my grandfather," Griffin shouted back, "right before you poisoned him. We didn't touch the old man. That was all natural. I've got recordings that say otherwise. Dawes talking about how everyone dies eventually. Your boss Dean planning my son's accident. All of it documented." The silence that followed was telling. They knew they were caught, which made them more dangerous, not less. Griffin heard movement. Someone trying to circle around. He fired a warning shot in that direction, and the movement stopped. But he was pinned here, 4 against 1, and eventually they'd coordinate an assault he couldn't stop. Then he heard new gunfire from a different direction. Cole and Tomas had joined the fight, providing covering fire. The odds shifted. Dean's men now had threats from multiple angles. "Stand down," Cole's voice carried across the yard. "State police are 1 minute out. You're all going to prison. Make it easy on yourselves." But Dean Callow emerged from behind one of the trucks, a pistol in his hand. Not aimed at Griffin or Cole, but at the barn itself. He fired 3 times, and Griffin smelled gasoline. Dean had shot the containers. Fuel was spreading across the barn floor, pooling and flowing. In seconds, this whole structure would be an inferno. Griffin ran. He burst out of the barn's back entrance just as Dean struck a match. The old man's face was twisted with rage and satisfaction. If he couldn't have the land, he'd destroy it, just like his brothers had destroyed the bunkhouse. The match fell. Fire erupted with a whoosh that made Griffin's hair stand on end. He rolled, away from the heat, came up on his knees, and saw Dean Callow standing there, silhouetted against the flames, smiling. "Your grandfather should have sold when he had the chance," Dean said. "Should have known the Callows always collect their debts." Griffin raised his rifle, but he didn't fire, because Tomas Ruiz stepped into view, his own weapon trained on Dean. "My father died in a fire you set," Tomas said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've spent 20 years hating the wrong people, believing your lies, working for you. Your father was collateral damage," Dean said dismissively. "And you've been useful. Don't ruin that now." Collateral damage. Tomas's finger tightened on the trigger. "My father had a name. Carlos Ruiz. He had a family. He was worth more than your greed." "Don't do it," Cole called out, approaching carefully. "Don't become what he is. Let justice handle this." For a long moment, Thomas stood frozen, war playing out across his scarred face. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "You're right," he said. "He's not worth it." That's when Dawes made his move. He'd circled around during the confrontation, coming up behind Cole. He grabbed the deputy, gun to his head. "Everyone freeze," Dawes commanded. "Griffin, drop the rifle. Tomas, drop yours, or I'll kill him." Griffin's mind raced. Dawes was desperate, cornered. In seconds, the state police would arrive. He just needed to buy time. "You can't shoot your way out of this," Griffin said calmly. "Too many witnesses. Too much evidence." "Maybe not," Dawes said. "But I can sure as hell make sure you don't win." He turned the gun toward the house, towards where he thought Owen was hiding. Griffin didn't think. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot caught Dawes in the shoulder, spinning him around. Cole broke free, disarming him in seconds. Dean Callow tried to run, but Thomas tackled him to the ground, years of rage and betrayal fueling his strength. Then sirens. Blue and red lights, state police vehicles pouring onto the property. It was over. State police secured the scene with professional efficiency. Paramedics treated Dawes' shoulder wound while officers cuffed him and read him his rights. Dean Callow and his men were lined up against their trucks, hands bound, facing arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and arson. The barn burned behind them, and fire trucks arrived to contain the blaze and keep it from spreading. Griffin stood apart from it all, watching numbly, still processing what had just happened. He'd shot a man, not to kill. He'd aimed for the shoulder deliberately. But still, the weight of that action would take time to fully understand. Cole approached, a bandage on his temple where he'd been grazed by a bullet during the initial firefight. "You saved my life," Cole said simply. "You saved mine first," Griffin replied. "Guess that makes us even. The state police want your statement, and they found the recording device. That evidence, combined with what we witnessed today, Dawes and Callow are going away for a long time." Griffin nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "Owen. I need to get Owen." They walked together to the silo. Griffin climbed the ladder, his muscles aching, and found his son still at the top, sitting exactly where he'd been told to stay. When Owen saw him, tears broke free. "Dad," Owen said, and Griffin pulled him into a fierce hug. "It's over," Griffin whispered. "It's all over." They climbed down together. Outside, a state police captain named Morrison met them. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Solace," she said, "we'll need your full statement, but first, is your son injured?" "No, I kept him safe." "Good man." Morrison gestured to the chaos around them. "Sheriff Dawes is claiming this was a property dispute that escalated, that you fired first." "That's a lie," Cole interjected. "I have body cam footage of the entire incident. Shows Dawes coordinating with Callow's men, shows them attempting arson, shows everything." Morrison nodded, satisfied. "Then we have what we need. Mr. Solace, you'll need to surrender your weapon for evidence, and we'll need you to come to the barracks for a formal statement. But preliminarily, it appears you acted in self-defense while protecting your property and family from multiple armed intruders." Griffin handed over his rifle. The weight of it leaving his hands felt symbolic, like he was releasing not just the weapon, but the violence itself. Tomas Ruiz sat on the ground nearby, hands cuffed, but not as tightly as the others. He'd cooperated fully, providing testimony against Dean Callow. When he saw Griffin, something complicated crossed his face. Shame, regret, maybe hope for forgiveness. Griffin walked over to him. Morrison watched carefully but didn't intervene. "Your father was a good man," Griffin said. "My grandfather told me that in his letter. Carlos Ruiz died trying to do the right thing, trying to protect people from evil. That's not a small thing." Thomas's eyes were red. "I thought your family killed him. Dean showed me newspaper clippings, told me stories. I believed him because I wanted someone to blame. Someone to hate." "I understand that," Griffin said. "I spent years angry at the wrong people too. Angry at my ex-wife when the real problem was me. Angry at the system when the real problem was I'd stopped fighting for what mattered." He extended his hand. "Your father's memory deserves better than what you became working for Callow. But who you become next, that's still up to you." Tomas stared at the offered hand for a long moment, then shook it awkwardly with his cuffed hands. "I'll testify," Tomas said. "Everything Dean told me to do, everything Dawes was involved in, all of it." "That's a start," Morrison said, pulling Tomas to his feet. "Come on, you're still under arrest, but cooperation will be noted." As the police led the prisoners away, Griffin felt Owen's hand slip into his own. They stood together, watching the barn burn down to its foundation. Everything his grandfather had built, everything that had survived 30 years of guilt and secrets, gone in minutes. But Griffin didn't feel loss. He felt relief. The barn had been a symbol of what happened in 1991, a constant reminder of the fire that killed 3 good men. Now it was gone, and maybe the past could finally be laid to rest properly. "What happens now?" Owen asked. "Now we rebuild," Griffin said. "Not just the barn, but our life here. The right way." Cole walked over, his statement finished. "The state police are launching a full investigation into Dawes' activities. Looks like he's been involved in illegal land acquisitions for years. This is going to clean up a lot of corruption in the county." "What about you?" Griffin asked. "Me? I'll probably be sheriff by next month. Someone has to do it right." Cole smiled, then grew serious. "Your grandfather would be proud of you. You stood your ground, protected what mattered." Griffin thought about his grandfather's final words. "You're twice the man I ever was." Maybe that was true. Or maybe they were both just men trying to do right by the people they loved, making mistakes, carrying guilt, but ultimately fighting for something bigger than themselves. The sun had set completely now. Stars emerged overhead, bright and clear in the Montana sky. Emergency lights still flashed, illuminating the scene in blue and red, but the danger had passed. Griffin looked down at his son and squeezed his hand. "Let's go home," he said. And for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Griffin truly meant it. 3 months later, Griffin stood in the same spot, but everything had changed. The barn had been rebuilt. Not a replica of the old one, but something new, modern, efficient. The insurance money from the fire had covered most of it, and the rest had come from the settlement the county paid for their sheriff's corruption. It seemed fitting somehow that Dean Callow's scheme had funded the very thing he'd tried to destroy. Owen ran across the yard, chasing their new dog, a border collie mix they'd adopted from a shelter in Billings. The dog, named Scout, had boundless energy and had helped Owen adjust to ranch life in ways Griffin hadn't anticipated. The boy laughed as Scout dodged around him, tongue lolling, tail wagging. Griffin smiled, watching them. Owen had grown in 3 months, not just physically, though he'd shot up half an inch, but in confidence. The boy who'd been quiet and withdrawn in the city now ran wild across 600 acres, building forts, exploring creeks, and learning to ride the horse they'd bought last month. He'd made friends in town, played on a youth baseball team, and talked about Montana like he'd lived here his whole life. A truck pulled up the drive. Cole Martinez, wearing his new sheriff's badge, climbed out with a cardboard box. "Thought you'd want these," Cole said, setting the box on the porch. "Evidence release, your grandfather's journal, the recordings, all the personal items that were held during the trial." The trial had been swift and decisive. Dawes and Dean Callow had both been sentenced to 20 years. Tomas Ruiz, cooperating fully, had received 5 years with possibility of parole after 2. The other men involved had taken plea deals. The corruption in the county had been exposed and cleaned out, top to bottom. "Thanks," Griffin said, looking through the box. His grandfather's journal sat on top, leather worn but intact. "You want coffee?" "Always." They sat on the porch, mugs in hand, watching Owen play with the dog. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that comes from shared trials. "Martha's organizing a memorial," Cole said finally, "for the 3 men who died in 91. Town's ready to tell the truth now. Honor them properly." "When?" "Next month, 22nd. We'd like you to speak if you're willing. You and Thomas both." Griffin considered this. "Thomas agreed?" "He did. Said he wants to honor his father's memory the right way, and he wants to apologize to you publicly." Griffin sipped his coffee. Thomas had written him from prison, a long letter explaining everything, how Dean had manipulated him, how grief had twisted into rage, how he'd spent 20 years hating the wrong people. Griffin had written back, It had felt important somehow to offer forgiveness, not because Thomas deserved it necessarily, but because holding on to anger would have poisoned Griffin the same way guilt had poisoned his grandfather. "I'll speak," Griffin said. "Tell Martha I'm in." Cole nodded, satisfied. They sat in silence a while longer before Cole left to continue his rounds. Griffin spent the afternoon working on the new irrigation system, so the ranch was coming back to life, slowly but steadily. He'd hired 2 hands, local men who'd worked ranches their whole lives and knew the land better than he ever would. They'd taught him about cattle, about the rhythms of the seasons, about reading weather and managing water rights. Griffin was still learning, still making mistakes, but he was learning. That evening, his ex-wife Sarah called. Their conversations had become regular, almost friendly. She'd been shocked by what happened, by the danger Owen had faced, but also impressed by how Griffin had protected their son. She'd agreed to expanded custody arrangements. Owen would spend summers and alternating holidays in Montana, the rest of the year with her in the city. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair, and it was working. "How's he doing?" Sarah asked. "Good. Really good. He's got color in his cheeks, dirt under his nails, and he's reading 2 grades above level. Ranch life agrees with him. And you?" Griffin looked out the window at the land his grandfather had died protecting. "I'm home," he said simply. After dinner, Griffin and Owen sat on the porch as they did every evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat. "Dad," Owen said as the sky turned orange and purple. "I'm glad we came here." "Yeah? Yeah, I know it was scary sometimes. But we made it. We're a team." Griffin's throat tightened. "We are. Always have been. Even when I didn't show it well enough. You're showing it now." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Griffin thought about his grandfather's final video, about the man who'd lived with guilt for 30 years rather than seeking forgiveness or justice. He thought about the mistakes he'd made in his own life, the failed marriage, the years spent chasing things that didn't matter, the distance he'd put between himself and his son. But he also thought about the choices he'd made since arriving here. Choosing to stay instead of run, choosing to fight for what mattered instead of surrendering to fear, choosing to forgive Thomas instead of nursing hatred, choosing to be present with Owen instead of hiding behind work and excuses. His grandfather had written, "Don't make my mistakes." Griffin understood now that the mistakes weren't about the violence or the choices made in desperate moments. The mistakes were about isolation, about carrying burdens alone, about letting guilt define your life instead of learning from it and moving forward. "Time for bed," Griffin said, ruffling Owen's hair. "Big day tomorrow. We're fixing the north fence. Can Scout come?" "Wouldn't dream of leaving him behind." Inside, Griffin helped Owen with his nighttime routine, then tucked him in. He paused at the doorway, looking back at his son. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad." Griffin walked through the house, checking locks more from habit than necessity. The threats were gone. The danger had passed, but some habits die hard. In his grandfather's study, now his study, Griffin sat at the desk and pulled out the leather journal. He'd read it cover to cover twice now, understanding his grandfather better with each reading. Tonight he took out a pen and turned to the first blank page. He began to write. "To Owen, when you're old enough to understand. This is the story of how we came home. How we stood our ground when others tried to take what was ours. How we learned that running from problems never works, but facing them with courage and honesty can heal even the deepest wounds. Your great-grandfather made mistakes. I've made mistakes. You'll make mistakes too. That's part of being human, part of growing, part of living. What matters is what we do after. how we own our choices, how we seek to make things right, how we protect the people we love. This ranch is yours someday. But more than the land, more than the water rights or the property value, I'm leaving you something more important. The knowledge that you come from people who stood for something, who fought for what mattered, who didn't always win, didn't always get it right, but who kept trying. That's all any of us can do. Keep trying, keep fighting for what's right, keep protecting what matters. The rest takes care of itself. Griffin signed his name, dated it, and closed the journal. He looked at the photograph on his desk, the new one, taken last week. Griffin and Owen standing in front of the rebuilt barn, Cole and Martha beside them, all smiling. A new family forged from old pain, a new beginning built on acknowledged truth. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and dark and beautiful. The ranch was quiet, safe, home. Griffin turned off the light and went to bed, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.